Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, well, so in today's episode, I thought I'd try to say something about the great writer Franz Kafka. And in particular, I want to try to talk a bit about not his novels, but a letter that we have that he wrote to his father. I don't think it's controversial to say that it's one of the most stunning autobiographical testimonies that have ever been written, and one that offers an incredibly penetrating psychological analysis of the effects of power and an authority figure within a family. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. Okay, so to put it bluntly, Franz Kafka had a lifelong struggle with his father, Hermann Kafka. And well, this is something that he wrote about in his now famous 47-page letter to his father, or as it's sometimes called, Dearest Father, written in 1919, when he was 36 years old, by the way. And he died just 4 years later. Anyway, what Franz Kafka writes about there is nothing short of heartbreaking. It's one of the most poignant descriptions of the consequences on a child of an overbearing father. Or to put it in the words of one particular commentator, it's one of the most poignant descriptions of a child's anxieties and insecurities that find their genesis in that child's relationship to his dominating alpha father. And even though this letter is to some extent worked on and annotated by Kafka himself, it's still just so powerful and so difficult to read precisely because of its clarity and its honesty and its psychological acuity. Oh, and by the way, it's a letter that never reached Franz's father. No, what happened is that Franz asked his mother to give his father a copy, but ultimately she just couldn't bring herself to do it. Oh, I should also add that we wouldn't have any of the works of Kafka at all, including this letter, if it weren't for Kafka's friend and publisher, Max Brody. You see, what happened is that on his deathbed, Kafka instructed Max to burn a bunch of what he had written. Well, thankfully, Max didn't do it, and this letter was eventually published in 1953. Okay, so what's going on in the letter? What kinds of things does Kafka say about his father and about his childhood? Well, lots, but let me just mention a couple of things that struck me. Okay, so first of all, I think that what comes across most prominently is Kafka's particular physical vision of his father when he was just a little tiny kid. What I mean is just how enormous of a figure he saw his father as, and how strong and how vital he took him to be. And here, one passage is particularly revealing. It's when Kafka remembers when he and his father used to go swimming together. This is what he says. He says, I remember, for example, how we often undressed in the same cubicle. I was skinny and frail and fragile, and you were strong and tall and thick-set. Even in the cubicle, I felt a puny wretch, and not only in front of you, but in front of the whole world, because for me, you were the measure of all things. But it wasn't just his father's physical stature, of course, as the measure of all things suggests. No, more importantly, it was that to Kafka, his father was also very loud and intransigent and self-certain and world-dominating and hot-tempered. In other words, to the young and very sensitive Kafka, he was a supremely grand and authoritative or tyrant-like figure. Now, given this disparity of power that his father made sure to manifest over his son, what this made the young Kafka feel was nothing but anguish and guilt, and that he was always, in one way or another, in the wrong. So faced with such an authoritative figure in his life, all he could do was yield to him and submit. And not only this, but Kafka's father's display of power was often whimsical and cold, like that of, as I mentioned, a king or a tyrant. Kafka describes one particularly anxiety-provoking incident when, one night as a young boy, he kept crying for water until his father got so mad that he pulled his little son out of bed, carried him out onto the balcony, and left him there all alone, shutting the door behind him. Now, this is what Kafka says about what he felt afterwards. He says, "I was quite obedient afterwards at that period, but it did me great inner harm. Even years afterwards, I suffered from the tormenting fancy that the huge man, my father, the ultimate authority, would come for almost no reason at all and take me out of bed in the middle of the night and carry me out onto the balcony. And that meant that I was a mere nothing for him." I don't know, it's difficult not to tear up when you read things like that, right? Anyway, given all of this, and I haven't even scratched the surface of the letter, but is it really any wonder Kafka would go on to write a story like the inimitable Metamorphosis? A story where the main character, a young man still living at home with his parents, wakes up one morning as a worthless vermin, as a useless and bothersome cockroach or insect of some kind. Really, when you think about it, how is this story that much different from the one that we get in the letter to his father? Because in the letter to his father, what Kafka is showing us, not in a fictionalized way, but in an exact real-life way, is how a small child and then a grown man is, over time, slowly transfigured into some hideous, measly, and powerless insect. And how all of this is linked to the psychological roots of overwhelming dependence and authority and power. But ultimately, here's the thing though. Kafka did, in a way, have his little victory. His one victory was how he was able to transform this very private life of anguish and self-doubt and submission into stories. Incredible stories. But stories, it must be said, which in one way or another always intimate a mysterious domination and oppression of some kind, derived in no doubt from a son terrified by his father, and from a father who wouldn't fully respond to his son's one and only desperate wish to be truly loved. Bye for now.